You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja.
We love the herb.
It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Monday, November 6, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Did you fall back? I sure hope you did. We're in a time warp. We lost an hour, gained an hour, that whole daylight saving thing. I know you folks in Indiana and Hawaii and Arizona don't know what I'm talking about, but the rest of us, it kind of messes with our head. And it's daylight saving, by the way. It's not daylight savings. Daylight saving. A little bit of trivia for you. Also, from the trivia vaults, today is a very special day. It is the 5th anniversary of the first states to vote to legalize cannabis. That's right. It was November 6, 2012, when Washington State and Colorado became the first states to vote to legalize the adult use and purchase and sale of cannabis. They're still working on the home grow part in Washington State, but we got 5 years of possession and 5 years of markets going on here. Well, 5 years possession, whatever. We voted on it 5 years ago, and you'd think the world would have come to an end, right? Oh, my God, we legalized marijuana in 2 states, and you'd think we'd be on the brink of nuclear war, and the climate would be melting down, and we'd be having gun massacres every week, and there'd be massive hurricanes and fires, and oh, wait. That will really bode very well for us. It's not our fault. I'm telling you, it's not our fault. Legalization of weed did not cause all those problems. And there's a whole bunch of other problems it did not cause. We're going to take a look at that in today's Reefer Madness Debunked. There was a symposium going on in the state of Indiana, and they were talking a lot about how they're going to fight so hard against the legalization of weed. So we'll tell you all the Reefer Madness they had to offer. Also on the show today, it's time for our patient-focused update with Americans for Safe Access. Dr. Jahan Marcu joins us to talk about those recent letters that were sent out by the FDA to the companies that are selling CBD products online, claiming they can benefit cancer. So we'll talk about that. Also on the program, we'll have time for a radical rant in the wake of the latest mass shooting. I ask, can we treat guns like marijuana? Or maybe treat marijuana like guns. I'm not sure which we should do. We'll talk about that. But first, let's get to the cannabis headline news.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Monday, November 6, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Marijuana Moment reports that Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin may move the medical marijuana ballot question to the June primary election. Activists who succeeded in collecting enough signatures to qualify a medical cannabis measure for the state's ballot had been expecting it would go before voters in November 2018. The announcement comes just 2 weeks after Oklahomans for Health, which is spearheading the effort, shot down a rumor that voting on the measure would be moved to March 2018. Should the measure pass, patients would be allowed to possess 3 ounces of marijuana on their person and 8 ounces at home. They could also cultivate 6 mature plants and 6 seedlings. And they would be allowed to possess 1 ounce of cannabis concentrates and 72 ounces of marijuana edibles. The measure would also remove the threat of jail time for possession of less than 1.5 ounces for non-registered patients who can demonstrate medical necessity. The Maine House voted today to sustain Governor Paul LePage's veto of a bill that would put in place the legal framework for retail sales of recreational marijuana, according to the Portland Press-Herald. The bill was the result of more than 9 months of special committee work after voters narrowly approved a law that put Maine among the 8 states and the District of Columbia to legalize the adult use of marijuana. While campaigning for re-election in 2014, LePage said that if voters approved legal marijuana, he would support that decision, but he backed away from that in his veto letter, writing, quote, "Until I clearly understand how the federal government intends to treat states that seek to legalize marijuana, I cannot in good conscience support any scheme in state law to implement expansion of legal marijuana in Maine," end quote. Current law makes it legal for adults to use and possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana or grow up to 6 plants of their own, but does not allow commercial production of marijuana or retail sales. In a story from KSDK-TV, a St. Louis man is taking his fight to legalize marijuana to the Missouri Supreme Court next week in a test of the Show Me State's Constitution. Mark Shanklin was convicted a year ago in St. Louis for growing more than 300 cannabis plants, but he's challenging the conviction on a constitutional basis, arguing Missouri's Right to Farm Amendment gives him and others the right to grow pot. The Right to Farm Amendment, passed in 2014, states, quote, that agriculture, which provides food, energy, health benefits, and security, is the foundation and stabilizing force of Missouri's economy. To protect this vital sector of Missouri's economy, the right of farmers and ranchers to engage in farming and ranching practices shall be forever guaranteed in this state, subject to duly authorized powers, if any, conferred by Article 6 of the Constitution of Missouri. End quote. But in legal briefs, the state's attorney general argues pot isn't agriculture and Shanklin is no farmer. Florida State Senator Gary Farmer, a Democrat from Broward County, filed a bill to legalize the smoking of marijuana for medical use. While Floridians successfully amended the state's constitution with Amendment 2 in November of 2016 to allow for the use of medical marijuana, the governor and the legislature specifically excluded the smoking of marijuana as a valid medical use in statutes written to implement the amendment. This decision has been widely criticized as a violation of the amendment's intent. Text of Amendment 2 made it clear to the 71% of Floridians who voted for it that the smoking of marijuana in private for medical purposes would be constitutionally guaranteed. SB 726 would attempt to reconcile the state statutes with the mandate established by the voters and enshrined in the Florida Constitution. North Dakota officials who are setting up a medical marijuana system don't expect marijuana to be available to patients for another year, 2 years after voters approved it. AP reports that State Medical Marijuana Director Jason Wall said officials work to devise a, quote, well-regulated program that also places a priority on ensuring medical marijuana isn't able to be diverted for illegal use. In response to numerous comments to the department noting that over 24 states have already established medical marijuana programs that North Dakota could have copied, Wall said, quote, I don't believe that would have benefited the program and the people of the state, end quote. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Monday, November 6, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. If you appreciate my full-time dedication to reporting and analyzing the news about cannabis, consider becoming a patron of the show. For just $4.20 per month, you'll help keep my live stream and podcast free while earning yourself your own private ad-free podcast link for the show, as well as links to the supporting articles and data. For a $9.99 VIP subscription, you'll get all that, plus my exclusive research, data tables, and graphics. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button today.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com, City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face-to-face with the monster of marijuana, he'd drop dead of fright.
You know, it's not easy trying to debunk 80 years of anti-marijuana propaganda in a 1-hour podcast, but let's try. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda's Reefer Madness Debunked.
All right, for today's Reefer Madness Debunked, we go to the state of Indiana, where there was a symposium reported on by the Tribune Star at the State House. This was called Speakers at Attorney General Symposium Bash Legalization of Pot. And some funny stuff in here. First of all, Tom Gorman. Love Tom Gorman from the Rocky Mountain high-intensity drug trafficking area. He is a veritable font of Reefer Madness. Here's his first quote from the story. What's happened with marijuana use in Colorado? It's a big thing with our kids. We're now ranked number 1 in the nation for marijuana use among minors. That's 55% higher than the national average. Okay, so, you know me. I look shit up. First of all, we got to address this whole, oh my God, Colorado's number 1, right? And I use the NASCAR analogy on this. And that is, if Dale Earnhardt Jr. races in one race and he comes in 4th, and then in a different race he comes in 1st, does that mean Dale Earnhardt Jr. drove faster in the second race? Maybe Dale Earnhardt Jr. was going 180 miles an hour and he finished 4th place in one race, and he was going 200 miles an hour and he finished 1st place in that other race. Or maybe he was going 175 in that second race, but everybody else was going slower. Whether or not you rose from being ranked 4th to being ranked 1st is irrelevant. It's how do you compare against yourself, not all the other states. And this idea about marijuana use in Colorado being 55% higher than the national average, and he says among minors, right? So I went to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, which I believe is what he's using here. And I've got the most recent numbers. Most recent numbers for Colorado for youth aged 12 to 17, monthly use was 11.13% of their population for 2014 to 2015. And that was top in the nation. There were 4 other states that were above 10%, Vermont, Alaska, Rhode Island, and Maine. So that's what he's all upset about, right? What he won't tell you is that 11.13% number is a drop from the prior year. The prior year, 2013, 2014, because they do these in 2-year chunks, the prior year was 12.56%. It went down from 12.5 to a little under 11.5. It dropped, or a little over 11, I should say. It dropped 11.39%, relatively speaking. Don't want to talk about that. A year after we got a full year into legalization, we added some more educational campaigns, and we established regulations better, and we labeled things better, and so forth. Fewer kids. But also, let's take a look about his claim about this 55% greater than national average. 11.13 is the current for Colorado. National average for the whole country, age 12 to 17, is 7.2%. Okay, so that's not 55% greater than national average. Make sure my numbers are correct here. Am I looking at the right number? No, let's get the right number, Russ. Got to be careful. Got to make, 55% above the national average. So let's compare this to other years. Because last year, Colorado was 74% above the national average. 2012-2013, Colorado was 56% above the national average. So going into legalization, we were 56% above. We went as high as 74% above, and now we're down to 55% above. So it's trending in the right direction, isn't it? Now, the other thing that you might want to bring up in this is to figure out who's been going up since legalization. How much has the youth use gone up since we legalized it, since 2012? And the Indiana Attorney General, Curtis Hill, in this story, wants to bring up, he says, talking about Tom Gorman, he says, we're like twins. Not only did Tom give a very entertaining discussion, but he is speaking from facts and data with regard to marijuana. And one of the things that gets lost in this opioid scare is the significance of how dangerous marijuana is in the entire equation. Hill, a Republican, says he opposes the legalization of marijuana in part because minors would use it. Quote, if you legalize marijuana, the very first thing that's going to happen is more young people will smoke pot. That's absolutely really something that we really can't afford to have. End quote. Absolutely. Hill said. Okay, so Indiana's Attorney General is warning us that if we legalize pot, kids will smoke it. The rate of the kids smoking pot will go up. Be inundated with potheads. And what we got to do is we got to do what Indiana's Attorney General has said we need to do. We need to maintain prohibition. We need to tell kids just say no. We need to have harsh criminal penalties like we have in the state of Indiana for the use of marijuana, which according to normal.org, which you can go to normal.org/laws/IN for Indiana and get right to their Indiana page. And that'll tell you that the current penalty for possession of any amount of marijuana in the Hoosier State is a misdemeanor with up to 180 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Now, you got any amount less than 30 grams as a second offense, strike 2, misdemeanor, year in jail, $5,000 fine. 30 grams or more, second offense, felony, 6 months to 2.5 years, $10,000 fine. So that's what we're going to do in Indiana. We're going to keep that up because it's worked so well. At least the Attorney General there, Curtis Hill, thinks so. But you know me, I look shit up. Here's what I found. Since 2012, we have seen a rise in the youth marijuana use rate in Colorado of 6.3%. In the 2011, 2012 data, 10.47% of Colorado kids used, and then it's up to 11.13 now. So that's a total rise, relatively speaking, 6.3%. Now that puts Colorado in the top 10, but guess what? It puts it at number 10. Yeah, of the top 10 states that had the most increase in youth marijuana use, Colorado is the 10th. Overall, in the United States, youth marijuana use stayed relatively the same. It stayed went up about 0.7. So yes, Colorado did have an increase. Since the years of legalization, there's been an increase in Colorado. But guess what? You look at the rest of that top 10, and it ain't medical marijuana states. Half the states in there are prohibition states. Louisiana came in number 8. Its youth use rate rose more in Louisiana than it rose in Colorado. An increase of 6.46%. In Texas, it went up 8.5%. In Wyoming, it went up 9.84%. In Kansas, the youth use rate went up 17.58%. And the winner, the state that had the greatest relative increase in teenage marijuana use monthly is, what do you know? Indiana. An increase of 29.32%. Back in 2011-2012, only 6.25% of Indiana youth, 12 to 17, indicated they'd smoke pot monthly. That number is up to 8.08%. Somehow, Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill, implementing and enforcing these strict prohibitionary marijuana laws, has presided over, has served over a almost 1/4 increase in the amount of kids in Indiana that are smoking pot monthly. So this little symposium is just a joke. These speakers don't know what they're talking about. They had Chris Christie there as well, who said, quote, I have literally been the only thing standing between New Jersey and medical marijuana legalization. Now, he's saying that as if that's a good thing. Chris Christie's talking about being the only person who can stand in the way of ending the prosecution of adults who use cannabis as if it were a good thing. It'll be great when we get this legalized nationwide.
I know it seems like such a simple message, just say no, but it's an important one.
All right, that sound means that it is time for us to take our union-mandated safety briefing. It is now 20 after the hour, unless you're in one of those 3 time zones that's on the 15 or the 45, but I don't think you are. We're back with Americans for Safe Access, Dr. Jahan Marcu, right after this. If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville. Join me as I cover the marijuana agenda at the Oregon Marijuana Business Conference the weekend of November 18th and 19th in beautiful Ashland, Oregon. The OMBC is Oregon's biggest and longest-running conference dedicated to the cannabis industry and marijuana activism. You'll hear an extended interview with influential State Senator Floyd Przansky, a VIP reception and keynote address from the legendary Henry Rollins, and a free after-party featuring music from Hieroglyphics and Souls of Mischief. Plus, you'll get information from 40 industry exhibitor booths and be able to question members of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission regarding cannabis issues they'll be ruling on. Visit OregonMBC.com to learn more and book your tickets now. That's OregonMBC.com for the Oregon Marijuana Business Conference. We'll see you there. Now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
It might not be easy to talk to kids today, especially about marijuana. But if you don't do it, who will?
This has been an actual anti-drug public service announcement. To combat this and other drug war hysteria, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific at live.mjagenda.com. Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. If you're a cannabis brand looking to build trust and awareness within the community, consider becoming a sponsor of this program. Your message will be seen and heard by the most dedicated followers of marijuana policy reform, who are loyal and supportive of those brands that give back to the community. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button to learn how your brand can also be featured in my live nationwide appearances. Thank you for your support.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
And let me be clear about marijuana. It is a potentially dangerous gateway drug that frequently leads to the use of harder drugs.
Whatever you're smoking, it's not marijuana.
The International Cannabis Business Conference is headed to Hawaii. Get your tickets now for the year's best cannabis industry island retreat this December 1st through 3rd. Kauai Grand Hyatt hosts the 3-day ICBC, which begins with a VIP reception featuring cannabis comedian Doug Benson. The ICBC features exhibitor booths, keynote speeches, and informative panels with industry experts and regulatory officials. Then, when it's all said and done, kick back for the incredible after party with music by reggae legends Morgan Heritage. There's also a singles golf tournament you can play on Monday, sponsored by Leafly Endured Ventures. Log on to internationalcbc.com to get more information and buy your tickets now. Special discount hotel rates are in effect, so act fast. That's internationalcbc.com for the International Cannabis Business Conference. Aloha.
Welcome to ACE's Patient-Focused Update. Since California became the first state to restore cannabis as medicine in 1996, almost every U.S. state now recognizes some form of cannabis as medicine. But since 1971, the federal government has steadfastly denied the medical benefits of herbal cannabis. Americans for Safe Access is the nation's leading organization fighting for the rights of all patients who use cannabis as medicine. Join us now for another edition of ACE's Patient-Focused Update.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of ACE's Patient-Focused Update, the podcast for Americans for Safe Access, the nation's leading organization standing for patients' rights to medical cannabis. And joining us is the Chief Science Officer, Dr. Jahan Marcu. Jahan, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Russ. It's nice to be here.
There's so much going on in the world of medical cannabis, and these days it's kind of intersecting with the pharmaceutical world in that we have this opiate overdose crisis people are talking about. The President's Opioid Commission just came out with their recommendation letter. Governor Chris Christie is the head of that commission, and they firmly rejected the idea that medical cannabis could be some sort of alternative, some sort of help with this crisis. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I know you've got a big push coming up about end pain, not lives, and that kind of ties into this whole opiate and painkiller issue. How wrong is the President's Commission on this particular issue, and what is the science showing us?
That's a great question. So there is a fair amount of research out there about opiates. There is I think a responsibility by the commission to be more forthright with the data they used and communications they used to come up with their decision. Notoriously they cite a study which looks at the medical cannabis area before there were dispensaries, before Colorado's laws passed, and saying that they saw an increase in abuse. And so there's a lot of flaws in this study. In fact, the only study we know of that they cited, which came out a few weeks ago. So I think what we're going to do at Americans for Safe Access for our End Pain Not Lives campaign is actually FOIA the request for how did they make their decision? Did they just talk to one person? How many scientists did they talk to? How many researchers did they talk to who actually work with this or work in pain clinics? And I think that they owe it to the public to see that due diligence. But to advocate for Congress to preserve medical cannabis, to fight the opioid crisis, Americans for Safe Access kicked off this End Pain Not Lives campaign on November 1st. And this basically has a couple goals: is to pass new regulations and legislation to make it easier for people with pain and chronic pain and opioid use disorder to utilize medical cannabis in their treatment plans. To leverage cannabis therapies in combating the opioid crisis by passing things like the Carreras Act and other legislation like the CJS Amendment, and also increasing education and research. But our direct action event was a rally on Capitol Hill on November 1st, and we began with a silence for the 91 Americans who died daily from prescription overdose. And we had following that moment of silence, Congressman Earl Blumenauer addressed the crowd, and he came out very powerfully saying the opioid crisis is a national emergency, killing 147 people a day. We must do more to help the families and communities torn apart by addiction. At the very least, the federal government should stay out of the way as states allow access to safer alternatives to opioids like medical cannabis. And so, ASA is gathered on November 1st to ask Congress to maintain the medical cannabis CJS amendment, which defunds or removes funding for the DEA to go after legal programs. And this is important because states that have cannabis programs are experiencing a 25% decrease in opioid-related overdoses and deaths. With a country where 1 in 3 citizens suffer from chronic pain and 1 in 10 have this type of pain for a day or 3 months or more, including medical cannabis as part of a healthcare approach, is not just a law enforcement response. These cannabis programs are saving lives according to the data that we see. And it's something that people with chronic pain need. They need these options. They also need things like the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment so that these people who are suffering with chronic pain who want to use medical cannabis, they'll actually have a real option. And so I think we're getting a little bit nervous as December's approaching and wondering if the CJS amendment is going to be approved, because I think that's going to be key to patients and their providers being able to continue to make cannabis an option.
I would encourage listeners to check out safeaccessnow.org to get information on how to contact your representatives and make sure they know how important this amendment is to them.
Absolutely. And if you're not sure where to start, you can always go to safeaccessnow.org to click on some of our tabs to get there. And this is an important event where we have to come together and work with other groups. And so we also worked on a letter addressed to elected officials with the Michael J. Fox Foundation, U.S. Pain Foundation, Epilepsy Foundation, National Women's Health Network, Realm of Carings, and ASA as well. And, we also had sister events in Ohio, South Carolina, Utah, Illinois, South Carolina, and Idaho, where advocates got together in this National Day of Action. So I think there's lots of room here. These aren't exclusive events. These are events for all of us who are interested in this issue, even if not directly interested in medical cannabis, should be involved with. And, I think we also need more doctors and clinicians to come out in favor, and especially if clinicians and doctors want to continue to be that trusted and reliable source of information for their patients regarding treatment options, they need to educate themselves on this issue, because chances are their patient is already using medical cannabis in some way to treat their symptoms, and they have to be knowledgeable on this topic and be able to discuss the pros and cons with their patients. And I think, there still needs to be some more research done in this area, but you could say that about anything. We don't know everything about anything, but there still is a ton of promising research out there.
Governor Christie, in his letter with that opioid commission, the only study or survey I could see that he referenced had to do with something from National Institutes of Drug Abuse claiming that a youth who got involved with marijuana would have a 2.5 times greater chance of developing an opiate dependency, which opens up the question, okay, but what about the people who are adults who already have an opiate dependency? Well, those are the ones we should be thinking of.
Yeah, and that study is, again, deeply flawed. The researchers actually in that study that's pulled from say in the conclusion that you should interpret the results of their report with caution due to the quality, because they didn't distinguish between street marijuana use, they didn't distinguish between medical cannabis use, because there were no medical cannabis, there were no adult use states at the time that they conducted these surveys, which did not confirm that the people actually use the product. You're just telling people that maybe you'll pay them if they tell you how much cannabis they're using. So, surveys are only as good as their methods, and even the authors of this study are telling people to hesitate between drawing correlations from a study that only shows associations that have no clinical relevancies or even can correlate to any clinical effects. And again, the study did not distinguish really between medical use, non-medical use, even if people were actually using cannabis or just something that was green leafy vegetable material that they were purchasing off the street. So I think that study is interesting. But will it repeat? And if that study is so true, why are we seeing reductions in similar behavior in programs that have adult use and medical cannabis laws? That takes a baseline and looking at an increase in that during a time when there were very few dispensaries open in the country. So it's a little hard to take it seriously. And in our last Cannabis Science Corner, our Facebook Live event, we tackled some questions about that report as well.
This is, and of course, on the other side, when we look, you had mentioned the studies that are showing 25% lower opioid overdose mortality in the states that have robust medical cannabis programs, defined as a non-oligopoly, situation where people can actually have decent access to cannabis. I came across some research from Aclara Research that showed 67% of the patients they had surveyed were able to reduce, or actually 67% were able to eliminate opioid use altogether. Another 29% able to reduce their opioid use. Why is this research not having an effect on the decision-making process going on in Washington, D.C.? I have my ideas. I'm curious what you might think.
Well, I think that's why we have things like the Information Quality Act. There are issues with how data is treated. And, I think there's a lot of politicians, as we've seen with this opioid commission, who like to cherry pick data. And, you criticize them about the data and it rolls right off their back. And so we can hold elected officials and our representatives accountable through, and this is what ASA did with the DEA. And if you go to the DEA's website, you'll notice that one of their hallmark articles is no longer there. So we filed an IQA petition and sued the DEA last year through the Information Quality Act, citing their denial of rescheduling petition, where they actually made some very positive statements about cannabis fulfilling many of the factors for it to be rescheduled or considered for rescheduling. But on their website, they said completely different things about its effects on human health. And so we were able to use publicly available information to put some pressure on them. And there's more of that story going to be coming in the next year. And I think the same thing we can apply to the commission. We can say, well, we have a Freedom of Information Act that we can use. We want to see all details of what happened there. We want, to hold them accountable. We're going to have to use what is available to us if we want to do that, because otherwise I feel that it'll roll right off their back. And so that's what ASA is working towards. And if you're interested in helping us with these efforts, we definitely could use. we'll put you to work if you want to help us with the opioid campaign and holding elected officials accountable, as well as making sure that the right data is being considered. And it's not just one study they're looking at that has never been reproduced with lots of limitations, and that they're actually looking at clinical data and that they're reaching out to people who have clinical experience to actually work in pain clinics. And I think part of the issue may be is that they're only focusing on the addiction side. And if you talk to an addictionologist who's usually paid by the state to take people for court-ordered drug treatment, so instead of serving jail time, you go to a drug treatment program, they see everything as an addiction, even exercise. They see people, they treat. So to them, they fit everything into it's an addiction paradigm, regardless of how addictive it is. Giving up drugs for one drug or one drug for exercise or other things that people use like that. So there's a fundamental problem there. And so I think we have to really look to clinicians who actually treat the patients. And I know it's kind of like splitting technical hairs here, but we really have to look to the clinicians who are trying to treat pain. The ones who are working on the front lines to actually develop treatments for patients, develop those clinical studies to compare how effective these treatments are objectively.
There was a statement in the letter, the opioid letter, that really shocked me. And I just want to read this to you because as a clinician, as someone who understands, people working with pain, I think this was shocking. It reads, quote, "The expectation of eliminating a patient's pain as an indication of successful treatment and seeing pain as the fifth vital sign, which has been stated by some medical professionals as unique to the United States, was cited as a core cause of the culture of over-prescribing in this country that led to the current health crisis. This must end immediately," end quote. And I read that and I'm thinking, is this the commission saying, tough it up, you're just going to have to live with pain for the rest of your life?
It certainly sounds like something our current administration would say. I'm not really. It's kind of hard to suss out the politics from science in that statement, to be perfectly honest. So it does sound a little cold, to be diplomatic. And I think that's the sort of pick yourself up by your own bootstraps sort of mentality, but ignoring that it's there. We have a lot of people who live really long in this country, have great, and there's a lot of complications that come with that. If you live long enough, you're either going to get cancer, dementia, or a chronic pain disorder. And usually those two first things I mentioned have a pain component with them. And so, we have at least 40 million Americans living with chronic pain. And I think that with such a large degree of the population trying to look for treatments for that and ways to that minimize adverse events and adverse effects, I think that might be a dereliction of responsibility potentially in that statement.
Yeah, it just shocked me, and I'm glad to hear your take on that. Dr. Marcu, let's talk about some other research. I mentioned the study on medical cannabis and opiate use. You mentioned the 25% reduction in opiate deaths. Is there any other interesting cannabinoid research we ought to know about or update our listeners about?
Well, I have to say 2017 has been a great year for cannabidiol and basic research. In terms of in petri dishes and animals and methods of analysis and extraction. I think we should buckle up for the rest of the year because there's going to be a lot more intensive scrutiny. And I think for our next podcast, we should talk about some of the product safety studies about CBD because I think that we're going to see more of that in the very near future because people are seeing all this research come out where, CBD can help to extinguish fear memories. And this was in the Journal of Pharmacology last month. We're looking at other, interesting conditions for CBD. There's been a lot of attention at CBD in clinical studies and lots of reviews and meta-analyses of clinical studies to really kind of figure out how to maximize the efficacy of CBD in studies that deal with anxiety or pain or looking at anti-epileptic drugs and how they differ and how they might improve existing treatment conditions. And people are looking at those products and trying to make decisions. So I think this research is really pushing more focus on the quality of CBD products on the market. But I would say, still the most promising research that exists is the extracts that contain both THC and CBD, and I'm talking about the nabiximols, the I guess the most common one that people be familiar with is Sativex, which is a CO2 hash oil extract of a CBD-rich plant material and a THC-rich plant material, which is put in a 1-to-1 ratio and sprayed under the tongue in an ethanolic tincture. And so that product has shown to be more effective than either THC or CBD alone. And I think we have to really start thinking about how are we going to preserve the plant when we talk about CBD, because it's not just about pure CBD. Pure CBD, pure THC, they're not the best ideal drugs. Pure THC, right, Marinol, is not a great drug. Pure CBD, we're seeing in studies people using hundreds of milligrams to get a therapeutic effect, especially in adults, per dose. So that could be a lot per day, very expensive. And so definitely looking at it in a whole plant setting, it appears to be more effective when looking at these double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies that they have conducted with this product. So we're seeing a lot of research come out just looking at CBD, but we have to remember that when this moves out of the bench and into the clinic, it's the whole plant extracts that are performing better than individual compounds alone. But I would encourage
that
people,
entourage effect that we often speak about.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the other news with regard to cannabidiol, which has blown up in the country since about 2014 in the Sanjay Gupta weed special, people became transfixed by the case of little Charlotte who had the seizures, and the seizures go away with the CBD. And that has led to an explosion of companies and products and information and misinformation out there about CBD, culminating most recently in the FDA sending some letters out to these companies, warning them that they can't claim CBD cures cancer, for example. What do you think about this from our aspect as advocates and activists? Are we helping or harming, or how? What's your take on the whole CBD situation and these FDA letters?
So this is part of the reason why I've devoted a lot of my time at ASA with their program called Patient-Focused Certification that looks at the liability of claims made on products. And there are standards for this under DSHEA, the Dietary Health and Supplement Education Act, which allows you to make claims about products outside of the FDA. But first of all, I think this shows us that we have a long way to go to protect medical cannabis. And we also have to remember that the powers of the state, of the government, are awesome, like compared to the average person. I mean, think about just the resources that are available to the federal government to go after an individual company. It can be intimidating, and I think this is just the tip of the iceberg for the FDA. We know also that other agencies like OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety, are visiting facilities and issuing substantial fines for things you'd expect other businesses to have. But I think we still have to be careful about what we say on social media, how you present yourself, how you use patient testimonials, and to be perfectly honest, I would say, where is that study that shows that CBD cured cancer in humans? And so if the industry is going to make claims, they should do research on their products. And I know that there are some practical issues with getting that done, but at the same time, you have to ask yourself, well, where does this claim come from? Am I extrapolating from a study done in a plastic test tube, or am I talking about something that's been observed objectively in a controlled trial? You should also ask, what are we doing with these products for safety? How have we tested the safety of these products? Did we just, formulate it and put it out on the market the next day? Or did we actually do some sort of basic safety analysis? And I think that where the industry is going to have to go is starting to actually pay for research, like other companies, coming together to develop research study designs that address the questions that they need to address about the safety, about their products, about claims they can make. And so there are some institutions who are engaging companies in that. But I think I think that this plays right into the hands of one scaring people about medical cannabis products. And I think this is just the first wave of some of the backlash I think we can expect. And, I think we really have to be on guard and vigilant to protect medical cannabis right now. You can see with the commission, with the FDA putting out these series of letters, they are, this is definitely a vulnerability. There's risks here. And, in the early days of ASA, the risks were first just raids from the federal government. Now we have risks of FDA inspections, OSHA violations, and the list is growing and growing as that Venn diagram grows and connects and overlaps with other regulatory agencies.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to understand, easier to present a protest against raids. People in wheelchairs getting handcuffed by jackbooted thugs makes for really good TV. Trying to explain to the public an OSHA violation and a fine that's going to be a little harder to deal with.
Well, and I think that's the real trick is putting this in value terms that medical cannabis patients, their clinicians, and their providers can understand. But this isn't going away right away. We have to remember that the FDA sent letters to, I believe, more than 25 products from a variety of companies, but they have to respond to the FDA. These are not just one-off letters. These letters have been made public. It addresses, the company directly and the specific violations. And so these violations are a matter of public record now, and their responses may also be part of that public record as well. And I think it's a good idea to be a little bit more critical. And if you don't have a compliance officer at your cannabis company, if you're not reaching out to experts who've been doing this for 10 or 15 years, it's a really good idea to always have your labels, your products, your compliance reviewed by an objective third party. And I think that is one of the tools that's available to some of these companies.
Well, we will have to dig more into the whole cannabidiol issue on a future episode. I know it's something we could spend a whole episode on. Dr. Jahan Marcu, Chief Science Officer for Americans for Safe Access. You can find the website at safeaccessnow.org. Make sure you take a look at their patient-focused certification and their educational opportunities for both patients and clinicians. And thanks so much, Jahan, for joining us again here for the ACE's patient-focused update.
Thank you. Better living through phytochemistry.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is brought to you by Cannabis Kamikaze, a professional licensed producer from Canada producing 3 pounds per light. Follow Cannabis Kamikaze on Twitter at Cannabis Kamikaze. That's at Cannabis, Kamikaze. Cannabis Kamikaze.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Today in the United States, 1 in 5 Americans live where adult access to cannabis is legal. Another 2 in 5 Americans live in medical marijuana states, but the government still claims there is no accepted medical use for cannabis in the United States, even after 20 years of medical marijuana in California. And they say we're the ones who can't think straight.
Health Cannabinoid, your ACMPR experts. Consultation services for medical cannabis. Visit healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. That's www.healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. Health Cannabinoid.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Just say no. Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am here. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Well, over this weekend, we once again, as we all too often have to do, have to address a mass shooting in America, which, by the way, this latest mass shooting in Texas pushed Columbine off the top 10 list. That's right. Columbine's not even in the top 10 anymore. Oh, my gosh. So I know about half my listeners are reaching for the stop button, and I'm not going to go there as far as, that in particular, as far as the Second Amendment debate, because I know there's a lot of people in the cannabis community who come at this from the right, who come at this from a libertarian point of view and strongly revere the Second Amendment to the point of open carry. All right. So I don't want to alienate people in that spectrum, but I do want to talk about a glaring discrepancy in this country, just as a comparison's sake, between our gun laws and our marijuana laws. For years we've been saying, treat marijuana like alcohol, which is not happening. Marijuana is treated far, far more strictly than alcohol is. But the mnemonic device was helpful as far as, don't arrest people for marijuana. I'm wondering maybe if we should treat guns like marijuana. Maybe that should be the new saying. Treat guns like marijuana, right? Imagine if it was as hard to get a gun and some ammo as it is in some states to get a medical marijuana card and some weed. right? I talked about it in the news today. North Dakota, they're already talking about, waiting another year or two before anybody gets any medicine, right? And the governor there, or the health guy there, saying, well, we want to make sure we have a program that is so well designed that it'll prevent any sort of diversion of medical marijuana into the illicit market. And what a stupid excuse that is, right? Because, already there is an illicit market in marijuana in North Dakota. People who are not medical cannabis consumers are currently smoking pot in North Dakota, right? If this were a brand new drug that nobody had ever seen before, and you were the first state ever to establish a market for it, then maybe you could have some concern of how we're going to keep this from getting out into the wild, into the illicit market. But trying to prevent it from getting into the illicit market that is already doing fine without it makes no sense whatsoever. Imagine if it was that difficult to get guns in this country. Oh my God, that you'd have to show, first of all, you'd have to have a qualifying condition, right? You have to qualify a condition for your gun, right? That you are the victim of domestic assault, you are a high-profile individual, that you are infirm and need to defend yourself, you have reason to believe that you would be attacked, right? First, you have to have your qualifying condition, and then you have to have that qualifying condition certified by a licensed professional. I guess doctor, what would be the equivalent for a doctor? Maybe you have to visit a social worker or something. They'd write your little thing off, but not all social workers would write your recommendation for your gun, right? Because a lot of them would belong to these social work consortiums and clinics and such that would forbid them from writing recommendations for guns. So you'd have to find a specialist. There'd be all sorts of gun specialist clinics that would open up, just like medical marijuana clinics, right? And go see your gun social worker, right? And then when you want to get your ammo, now that you've qualified as a security gun person, whatever we'd end up calling it, then to go get it, you got to go to a specific building that only sells ammo, right? Some places wouldn't even be allowed to sell guns, just ammo, and they got to card you every time you buy your ammo, and they have a limit. You can only buy 24 bullets at a time. That's it. You can have just 24. You can have 24 bullets. That's it, or less. I don't know. Whatever the limit might be. Like marijuana, right? Treat guns like marijuana. Now, I know, again, a lot of my listeners are going, that's ridiculous, that's crazy. That's what I'm trying to say. Whichever side of this guns debate you're on, if you think there ought to be more guns, there ought to be fewer guns, it's ridiculous that we treat guns the way we do compared to how we treat marijuana. Let's treat marijuana like guns. Let's flip it around. Let's go vice versa on this, right? Right? You can get a concealed carry permit that will be good in, 38 other states, right? Like, you go to Florida, get your concealed carry permit with 4 hours on the range and a background check, and you get your concealed carry permit. And then there's 38 other states, 38 total, that'll recognize that concealed carry permit. You can go all the way to Idaho and have your concealed carry permit, right? Wouldn't that be great if medical marijuana states were like that, right? One state, California, the easiest state, like Florida, easy to get a gun. California, easy to get a medical marijuana card. And then 38 other states recognize your concealed carry. Look at whichever side we're going to fall down on this. I'm getting to the point, I'm old enough now that I begin to lose hope that we're going to do anything about the gun situation. But wouldn't it make sense that we treat them let's treat the guns like marijuana. Let's make the guns really hard to get like marijuana is. Or let's treat the marijuana like the guns. Let's say you can get them anywhere. You can have as much as you want. You can buy as much ammo. You can buy as much guns. Because certainly if we're going to have a standard that allows the bullet spraying devices to be so free, then there's no reason to be so strongly restricting the herb. Hell, I've got the solution. Let's put them together. Let's make it mandatory. When you buy guns, it comes with weed. Guns and weed, right? Maybe we can get a few of these, losers that snap and go shoot up a church. Maybe if they're smoking a couple of bowls beforehand, they forget what they were going to do. Or maybe they mellow out a little bit. Maybe they take a deep breath and maybe they realize the world ain't so bad. That's it. We'll put the guns and the weed together. Yeah. Buy your 9mm. Get an ounce to go at Jimbo's Guns and Weed Shop. I don't know anymore. And I'm sure I probably offended people with how crass I am about this and joking about it, but I don't know what else to do anymore. Reason doesn't seem to work. Logic, facts. Got to embrace the black humor in it all.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
For everyone here at Delta 9 House and Studios, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You plant it, you grow it, you try it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you